Okay, hello, ESL 42 class. This is our reading lecture for Chapter 7, Inferences, and that's on page 273. And as you can see from the posting on the Blackboard assignments page, I'm asking you to open your books to page 273, and then I'd like you to work through this chapter during my lecture. And I want you to do it this way. I'm going to go over some points as we go, and then I'm going to ask you to do some, not all, of the practices in this particular chapter. I don't feel all of them are entirely helpful, and some of them are kind of confusing. So I'm not going to ask you to do every practice in this chapter. But I do want you to listen and follow along with me in your book, annotating the things that I've annotated. Think carefully about them, and then as you go through, certainly mark any questions that you have. And for this video and for the other videos, anytime you feel that I'm going too quickly, just keep in mind, you can pause the video, go back and rewind and listen again. I am trying to break these videos apart so that we don't have them as long for the downloads when I post them. So I'll do my best to work with you. I don't want to rush it, and I don't want to also leave anything out. So I'm going to do the best I can in this case to walk you through this chapter on inferences. Now, we've done implied main ideas. When an author implies something, we as readers have to infer what they're implying. So you'll remember from our implied main ideas that the author doesn't tell us what the main idea is. They only give us some supporting details, and we have to figure ourselves out what the implied idea is. So when some author or speaker implies, then the reader or listener must infer, mean figure out. Inference is like doing detective work. If you're a policeman, for example, you have to figure out who did the crime and why. So we'll take a look at some of these examples. Let's look at your books that you should have in front of you now at this first page of inferences. Of course, it says, discovering the ideas that are not stated directly in writing is called making inferences or drawing conclusions. So again, they're implied. We as the reader have to infer. So let's take a look at the cartoon that they have here. I think it illustrates the point pretty well. It says, he's thinking, I'm thinking this isn't the best time to try this restaurant. And then they have a sign that says, help wanted, chef, dishwasher, waitstaff. That's everybody who works in the restaurant. So the joke, of course, is he's looking at that sign and he's thinking, if they don't have a chef, they don't have a dishwasher, and they don't have a waitstaff, they're probably not going to have a very good time at the restaurant. So he's inferring that, right? It doesn't say this is a bad restaurant, but he's looking at that sign and he's making an inference about how happy they will be. So of course, you would have checked at the bottom A, the couple's not likely to have a good dining experience, and D is inferred, whoever's running the restaurant's not doing a good job. The boss is not keeping chefs, dishwashers, and waitstaff. So he's probably not a good boss. And because they don't have those people at this point, they're probably not going to enjoy their time at the restaurant. So this is a very quick example of how we make an inference. They give us clues, help wanted, and then we infer something based on that information, or figure out. Okay. Next thing I wanted to point out is inferences in reading. And obviously this is a reading class, so we take a look here. One of the first things I've annotated, and you should annotate this now as I read. It says, second sentence, as one scholar has said, inferences are statements about the unknown, things we don't know, made on the basis of the known, things that we do know. So it says to draw inferences, we use the clues provided by the writer, our own experience, and logic. So that's three things. Clues by the writer, our own experiences of the world, what we know about it, and our logic to figure things out. And that's exactly what we've been doing when we've been studying vocabulary and context. We don't know what the word means, perhaps. We look at the rest of it, and we use that to infer the meaning. That's how we figure out vocabulary and context, which we do on every single vocabulary test, and which you've already done in the first chapter of this book. Okay? You can look at those practices on the earlier pages, but I'm going to skip now to page 277. And here, again, I'm just pointing out the bold-faced words. I know someone who is telling me, oh, Professor, you're just pointing out the bold-faced words. Yes, that's true, but I hope at the same time I'm making you understand why those bold-faced words are important. So I'll try to be a little more patient as I go over these and explain more about why. Okay, so first, never lose sight of the available information. What that means is, if we're studying a murder mystery, and we have a bunch of information. We have a knife, we have some footprints, and we have a fingerprint, and we have some blood. And we figure, oh, all of these things belong to one person except for the blood. And the blood, we did a DNA test, and it's somebody else. So we can't assume that the person who made the footprints, left the blood, the knife, and the other items is guilty, because there's still the fingerprint. And so we have to use all the clues. We can't just pick and choose what we want to look at. Just as a police officer can't just pick and choose the evidence, they have to look at all the evidence. If there's fingerprint, blood, knife, shoes, they've got to make all of those things fit to one person, and then they have a good case to accuse or arrest that person. So that's a kind of extreme example of inference. But that's what we're talking about when we talk about never lose sight of the available information. We have to use all of that. Next thing, use your background information and experience. Okay, yes, we need to use our experience of the world. Most people in the United States, for example, don't like going to the dentist. So if you ask somebody how their dental appointment was, and they go, oh, it was just wonderful. Okay, first you know their tone is sarcastic, but you know from your background experience that the way they're saying that means that they probably did not have a good time. So sarcasm is a kind of inference where we judge the person's body language and the words that they say and realize that they're not really saying what their words are. This is an important point right below too. Again, looking on page 277, it says the more you know about a subject, the better your inferences are likely to be. So a lot of reading, a lot of listening to the radio and the TV, get a lot of experience of the world, especially because for many of you this is kind of a new culture here as well as a new language that you're learning. So in order to make good inferences, the more you know about our culture, the better you'll be able to do that. Okay, so keep in mind, if your background in an area is weak, your inferences may be shaky, or shaky means weak in this case. So learn as much as you can about the world and you will get better at making inferences. The world, culture, and so forth. Last of all, consider all the alternatives. Excuse me, so a police officer has to think, okay, who could have done this murder or this crime? And they have to consider all the alternatives. Who had keys to the house? Who had an argument with the person? Who knows? Something of that sort. But you have to consider all the alternatives before you come up. They give this example, which helps clarify. The doctor analyzing your rash and fever may first think of and then eliminate several possibilities before coming to the right conclusion. So the doctor could look at that and say, well, it's a rash, maybe that's poison ivy, maybe it's an infection. They have to go through all the steps in the blood work in order to finally figure out what's the right diagnosis for the condition. And so that's what we mean by consider alternatives. Okay? Now, I would like you to pause this video and do practice 1. So go ahead and pause the video right here, do practice 1, and then you come back, and of course check your answers in the back, and then I'm going to move on to the next section. I just want to go through this chapter section by section. So I'm not going to stop the lecture, but I do want you to stop this video right now and do practice 1. That's at the bottom of page 277. When you're finished, go ahead and continue, as I'm going to do now. Of course, please continue. There's 2 practices. Go ahead and continue. After you do practice 1, do practice 2, and check your answers. Okay, now that you've done that, I want to talk a little bit about inferences in literature. Literature is what we're reading here. This novel that I'm going to talk about in a separate video, Fahrenheit 451, is an example of literature. And it says, if you'll read along with me here, you should annotate this in your book, again, page 277. Inferences are very important in reading literature. While writers of factual material usually state directly much of what they mean, creative writers often provide a verbal picture that shows us what they mean. It is up to the reader to infer the point that the creative writer has said. For instance, a nonfiction writer may write the following. Let's read these two things. A man got angry at the person using a cell phone in the theater. Very straightforward, very factual. A guy was using a phone in the theater, somebody else got angry. Okay? Facts, scientific, very straightforward. Now let's look at the next one. It's more like a story. A novelist, a creative writer, would write this instead of the man got angry at a person using a cell phone in the theater. He would write, Thomas turned to face the laughing red-haired girl sitting behind him in the theater. A vein in his forehead was throbbing. Would you mind very much turning off that cell phone? He hissed. A few of us are here to actually see the movie. Okay, so I hope you could hear in my voice and my reading that there's a big difference between somebody used a cell phone in the movies and he got angry, and the whole story, we have to figure out that he's angry with the girl using a cell phone. And now, at the bottom of the page, I'd like you to read along with me with another example, and this one might be even more clear. This is from a very popular children's story here in the United States. Okay, so first, how would a scientist or a non-creative writer make their statement? It would be like this. This is at the bottom of page 282, if you want to turn to that page in your book. Okay, so here at the bottom, a nonfiction writer writes this. A farmer is about to kill a small pig, but his daughter objects. So the farmer decides to let his daughter learn for herself that a small pig can be a problem. Very straightforward, very factual. Now I'm going to read a more creative way in which the reader has to think about what's going on. And take a look at this one. Okay, here's another story. It tells the same thing that we just read. Fern, said Mr. Arable, I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along. But it's unfair, cried Fern. The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been born very small at birth, would you have killed me? Mr. Arable smiled. Certainly not, he said, looking down at his daughter with love. But this is different. A little girl is one thing, and a little runty pig is another. I see no difference, replied Fern, still hanging on to the axe. This is the most terrible case of injustice I ever heard of. A queer, that means a strange, a queer look came over John Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. All right, he said, you go back to the house, and I will bring the runt when I come. I'll let you start it on a bottle like a baby. Then you'll see what trouble a pig can be. Okay, so we can see very clearly between those two that this one is a much more creative way to say the same thing, which is simply a farmer was going to kill a pig, his daughter didn't want him to, so he let her have his way. He succumbed to his daughter's wishes. But the story, I hope you can see, is so much more emotion, and it connects you in a much deeper way to the story of the farmer and the little girl. Here we see the emotions, and so we have to infer when we read. What does it mean that he smiled? Yeah, it means that he loved the girl. You can answer these questions down below, and you can see what's being inferred. Yeah, he loves the girl. A, he probably had many pigs in his lifetime. Down below, I'm just looking at some of these answers here. He's almost ready to cry because C, he's touched. He's emotionally touched by his daughter's willingness to protect the pig. And then we can conclude, B, he believes that raising a pig will teach Fern, his daughter, some lessons. So here we see we have to think. We know about children. We know about farm animals. We know how hard it is sometimes for children to accept death as a part of farm life. So because we know, our background tells us about what a farm is all about, we understand this story. We can infer, make an inference from this story about what's happening here. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is figures of speech. There are really only two figures of speech that they talk about here, and obviously I want you to annotate these. It says creative writers use figures of speech. Two most common are similes and metaphor. A figure of speech is a way to express something, usually by way of comparing one thing to another. And here we see that a simile is a comparison used with like, as, or as if. And then you can look at the cartoon, but I think more importantly we look at these examples here. That Halloween night was as dark as the inside of a witch's hat. So of course, inside of a witch's hat there is no light, so it's perfectly dark. And of course the hat is also black. Most witches wear black hats, as you may know. So here they're comparing the night to the inside of a witch's hat. Next, it says, after you've broken up with a boyfriend or girlfriend, every day feels like a cloudy, cold Monday morning. And here, if we know about our culture, Monday morning is usually the day everybody goes back to work, and a cloudy, cold day, usually people don't like that. So they're comparing the feeling of breaking up with someone you love to the feeling of waking up on a cold, cloudy Monday. Both of them, we feel sad, depressed, don't really want to do anything. So that's a comparison. And then finally, these are similes again. If he senses you don't know the material, our math teacher will attacks like a shark. Okay, we know a shark attacks quickly and viciously. And so here we see that the teacher, if he thinks you didn't do the work, will attack like a shark. Okay? So these are examples of similes when we use like or as. She was pretty as a flower. He was sharp as a tack. Okay, that makes you a couple of common similes. So as or like, these are going to be similes. However, at the bottom of the page, they talk about metaphor, and that's an implied comparison. So we have to infer if someone implies something, implies without using like or as. Okay? So here they say, no man is an island. Okay? They're not saying like an island or as an island. No man is an island. So that's where we're just directly comparing. Another way to think about metaphor is if I said, you're sitting in the classroom and someone comes to the door. You can't see out the door, but I can. And I tell you, a mountain of a man is standing outside the door. And so we know a mountain is big, and so you could probably infer from that metaphor that the man I'm talking about is a big man, big and strong, like a mountain. So we say a mountain of a man. I didn't say like a mountain or as a mountain. I just said he is a mountain of a man. So in this case, metaphor is when we directly make a connection between two things, the man and the mountain. Mountains being big and strong. Okay, we can look at a couple of their examples here. That's at the top of page 286. These are examples of metaphor. Again, notice no like or as. So simile, like or as if, and metaphor, just a direct comparison. Just look at a couple of these at the top of the page. The grade on the paper was a dash of cold ice water in my face. So how do you feel when you get a dash of cold ice water right in your face? You probably don't feel good. And you also don't feel good when you get a bad grade on a test paper. So here, the grade on the paper was a dash of ice water in my face. We can infer that this person was shocked and surprised and upset that they got a bad grade. Okay, the next one. When Nate got up to speak, he was a mass of quivering jello. So we know, if you know jello, it's kind of a dessert that kids eat, it kind of shakes. So he's nervous and he's shaking. So they're saying he was a mass of quivering jello. He wasn't really quivering jello. They're just making a metaphor that means he was so nervous that he was shaking like a dessert jello would shake. Okay? So I think now you can see that metaphor is a like or as simile is a like or as comparison, and metaphor is a direct comparison when we say things like, he was a mountain of a man. It uses the verb is. Okay? So now I'd like you to pause this video and I want you to do practice 3 and 4. I'm going to continue with the lecture, but right now I'd like you to start on page 286 and I would like you to complete practice test 3, and on the next page, practice test 4. Pause the video, do those, and then check your answers, and we're going to continue this lecture. Okay, the next thing that they're talking about here is inferences in graphs and tables. Graphs and tables are pictures that often science books and I guess sociology books, different kinds of professional and academic texts use graphs and tables. We're going to look at a graph and a table in just a minute. But it says very often they're used to show comparisons and changes that take place over time. So we're going to see some examples of that. And they give you some good steps here about reading a table or a graph. And I think you should always do that. It's very important. It says first read the title of the graph. So that will be an important thing to do. And you should go ahead, I didn't annotate that, but you should. Read the title. What is it about? Give you a general idea. Here they list the title of the graph that appears on the next page. Changes in the workforce. That's step 1. Step 2, check the source. At the bottom, you will usually find a source of information. Here, you see, well, you can't see it here, but in small letters on the next page, you'll see Statistical Abstract 2012, James Henslin 2013. All right, and then the third step, read any labels or captions at the top or sides or underneath, and tell us what each side, bar, or line represents. So we asked what the span of years is covered, 1900 to 2010. Again, you'll look at your graph on the next page. You can't see it here. What type of work? White collar, blue collar, and farming. White collar is more educated, like computer programmers, doctors, even college professors. Blue collar is more hard work, people who repair cars, even maybe work around your house or clean up buildings. And then, of course, finally farming, working with plants and animals to grow. So here, I just wanted to show you the graph that we've been talking about on the earlier pages. This is the x-axis, and up is the y-axis. If it helps you remember, for the longest time I had trouble, and I found some, I think a student told me this, but it kind of rhymes. Y to the sky. And that means the y-axis always goes up towards the sky. So most charts have an x-axis and a y-axis, and that's what you want to be aware of here. So, looking at this, you can make some inferences here. You should check 1, 4, and 6. So when we look at this graph, and if you carefully examine the labels, white, blue collar, and farming, we look at the dates, again, changes over time, and then the percentage change here, the title at the top. Again, these all indicate these questions. So if you did not get these or can't figure out why these are checked, then you want to make a note of that and ask me in class, and I will help you. Okay, here I would like you to go ahead and do practice 5. Go ahead and pause the video now and do that. And that takes us up to the end of the chapter. So now we've gone over some important ideas about making inferences. When we make inferences, they are not stated directly, but we have to figure them out, just like a policeman figuring out a crime. And inferences are also a very important part of reading literature. Again, going back to this, sometimes we have to infer what's going on here in this novel. And I'm going to try to point out some inferences when I review the novel in our novel lecture, which I'm going to start in just a few minutes. Okay, so let's see if that takes care of it. 298. All right, so I'm going to ask you now to complete review test 2 and review test 3, and I will go over those answers in class when we return next time, so please remind me to do that. All right, that takes care of the chapter 7 inferences, so I want to make sure that you've gone through that chapter, you've done the practices as we went along, and make sure that you bring any questions. If I went too quickly or if you have any questions, you can always rewind the video and go back and look at it again, but also please make a note of any questions you have because I certainly want to answer those, and I will when we return next Thursday. Okay, thank you.